Hello everyone, I'm Tony Southcott from Human Echoes, and today we are here to talk about Dr. Sleep. I was fortunate enough to get in on a showing last night, about 8 or 9 days before this movie actually comes out, and I'm excited to talk about this. If you want to go into this movie completely clean, I'm going to try to keep this spoiler free, but everybody has different definitions of spoilers, so if you're wanting to not spoil it, pop out here, come back after you see it. This is a very good movie, and I want you guys to see it. I want you guys to enjoy it. It's one of the better Stephen King adaptations I've ever seen, and it's following up one of the best adaptations that I've ever seen as well in The Shining. And this is something that took decades to build up to because we had to figure out what happened with Danny Torrance. And that's essentially where this film starts. I'm going to give a very short summary. I'm going to talk about some links to the Dark Tower. At the end of this, there's some really cool stuff here, so bear with me as I just give the lowdown. From the trailers, I think a lot of you guys have figured out that there are other psychics who shine in this world, like lots of them. Not like hundreds and hundreds of thousands or anything like that, but a fair amount. And the group that we're looking at, they are a psychic vampire group called True Knot, and they're headed up by Rose the Hat, who is played by Rebecca Ferguson, who was fantastic. That's another thing about this movie. There are so many good actors in this. A lot of them pulled from Hill House because Mike Flanagan just likes to work with the same people. Not all of them, but there are quite a few. Also, the young girl who is played by Kylie Curran, Abra, is fantastic. Just so many good child actors out there. I think they've just upped their game over the last few decades because it used to be so groan-inducing to see kids act. And now it's just so much better. This girl is fantastic. And I really hope that someday we get to see like a bigger story possibly involving her. Even though this is a much bigger story, which is where you're going to see it deviate from The Shining. The Shining takes place mostly in just one location at the Overlook Hotel. Like, you've got different spaces there, like the maze and everything. But this is a much bigger thing. This starts in different parts of the U.S. and is kind of a road movie in moments, and then moves into like going back to certain places. And the way they did this was absolutely incredible to me. Like, I loved seeing the scope of the story, because if you just do another Shining type thing where it's like one person in a hotel, you're not treading new ground. And this is asking like what happened to Danny. He's not very well adjusted after the events of what happened with his family. Like, no kid's gonna get through that unscathed, especially whenever you've got the psychic powers that he does. It's just a huge burden, and he just goes back to drinking, and he becomes his father in a lot of ways. It's intense. It really is intense. And Ewan McGregor understood this role more than a lot of people that were asked to come in and audition for this. Like, they asked Chris Evans and a bunch of other people. And Mike Flanagan was saying that Ewan McGregor was the one who came in with a bunch of notes talking about how this movie was a parallel to Stephen King's recovery, and how when Stephen King wrote The Shining, he was still dealing with the demons of alcoholism that were just hard-seated into him, and how this movie was contemplative. It's a reflection of his sobriety after all this time. And I think that that's part of why Dr. Sleep ended up being an incredible story. It also sometimes feels a little bit like a superhero movie in the scale of some of these attacks and things that are happening, like where you've got Danny and Abra against the True Knot and so on. So you've got a bigger scale, you've got a lot more people to deal with. Like, you had the cast of ghosts in The Shining, and that's fantastic, and you get to see some old things from the original movie still haunting Danny, and that's really cool. You get to see just a different way that the Shine manifests itself. And knowing that all this is connected to Stephen King's other books and seeing it so recently, it's just fun to think about like how this world kind of influences itself. And that's canonical in the books, where in it, Dick Halloran shows up in Derry at one point. All this stuff is connected. So just to see the modern It with this coming out shortly behind it, it's a big year for the Stephen King universe. That's actually going to bring me into a couple things where they actually linked it to the Dark Tower universe. I'm not sure if you guys are nerds about this like I am, but it's fun to see the linking things between these worlds. Skip about 30 seconds if you don't want to know about these. None of these are really spoilers, it's just things that get said and little nods to the Dark Tower universe. So, the bus transportation is called the Tet Transport, which Tet is basically a group of people on their Ka-Tet, like a sort of destiny run. You've got Ka mentioned, like Dick Halloran says, like Ka is a wheel, and that's referring back to like basically Roland's favorite thing about like Ka being like that thing of destiny where it keeps coming back around, and it's just so fun to see these things. I'm sorry, I'm such a nerd for them. Some of the next ones were like you had Lemark Industries, which is one of the main business entities from that. And also there's a baseball player that is integral to the plot whose number is 19. Everything always equals 19. I think that there's one more that the internet hasn't picked up on, and that's above Abra's bed. There's an A, but there's also a balloon animal next to it that is like a dog, but if you turn it a little bit, it would be a K. That spells Ka. I might be reaching there too, so who knows. But if you're a fan of Stephen King, if you're a fan of these adaptations, this walks a perfect line between going with the book and going with the Kubrick movie. Because the Kubrick movie was not very well liked by Stephen King, but it's much more recognizable for its themes, because that made-for-TV one that was a lot closer to Stephen King's book was not very well received. It wasn't horrible, but it was bad compared to what Stanley Kubrick was able to do. And that brings me to the next point of what Mike Flanagan is able to do with this world. I won't say that Mike Flanagan is a better director than Stanley Kubrick. I won't say he's quite on the same level, but I think he has that love. He just doesn't have the insanity that accompanies it to be so detail-oriented. Then again, I could be wrong considering what he did with episode 6 of The Haunting of Hill House, which we'll have a video on later. It's amazing seeing how detail-oriented he was in trying to bring life back to all these characters, to build a story, to be brave enough to just go hard, which he goes hard. There's some violence in this movie that a lot of movies don't want to get to. There's a lot of conceptual things that I think a lot of directors aren't able to express as well as Flanagan did. So we're looking at a story that is building on Kubrick and King and finding that middle ground. And as far as the way the audience reacted to this movie, it's not as scary as the original Shining was. It has very creepy moments, lots of cool imagery, lots of sort of Inception style movement, a lot of high concept things of going into people's heads, which you see with Dreamcatcher and a few other of Stephen King's movies, the idea of your mental library, your mental whatever. And it's fascinating to just see how it all works. And I think that's where this movie excels, is just bringing more life into the Shining universe, but it's not quite the suffocating, driven, fall into insanity that The Shining is. So if you're trying to compare it as the same type of movie, you're not going to have as much fun with it. Just understand that this is in the world, this is the same characters, and you're looking at a different story, and it's a lot of fun. Also, Snakebite Andy and Crow Daddy and so many of these other characters, I wish that we would have gotten a 10-episode expanded series on HBO to let us explore this world, because I think you easily could have done that, because there's a bunch of fascinating characters we don't get to learn enough about. Maybe there'll be a director's cut where we get some more. It's a somewhat long movie where it feels like it's about 90 minutes. It's paced well, it's beautiful, it's a good, it's just a great shot movie. You even see some of those Mike Flanagan things where it's a 90-degree turn. You see a lot of angle work that he's been trying to challenge himself to add into everything that he does. And Mike Flanagan is honestly one of the best directors of our time. He's one of the only ones other than Frank Darabont that I think you can really, really trust the Stephen King adaptation too. The people that did the new It did pretty well, but I think that that Flanagan has a better feel for understanding that Stephen King stories aren't necessarily horror stories. They're character-driven stories that have horror elements in them. You could almost call this one sort of a dark fantasy type movie, and I have no problems with that. It was a fantastic, fun movie, and I'm glad that I got to see it early. I'm going to go see it again whenever it hits normal theaters, and I think you guys should too. I'd love to hear what you think in the comments, if you're hyped for this movie, if you're skeptical, if you've had a crush on Ewan McGregor since Phantom Menace, like the people that I went with did. I just want to hear what you guys think about this, if you've seen it, if you haven't. Either way, thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing to Human Echoes, and if you really enjoy this, check out our Patreon at patreon.com/Human Echoes. $2, $5, $10 and beyond, get you all sorts of cool swag, access to bonus podcasts, and things like that. Love you guys. Talk to you soon.